What is the dumbest way the popular kid messed up their life? This kid wasn't necessarily popular, but he was on the verge. He wanted nothing more in the world than to be on our high school's cross-country team. He just didn't have the talent for it. He'd practice and try out repeatedly, but could never quite make the cut. Everybody knew about his desire to be on the team, and I think most of us were pulling for him because he had the heart, just not the legs. Anyway, one day in gym class, we were having a fitness test in which we were to run laps around the outer perimeter of our school and complete as many laps as possible. Most of us dropped out after a lap or two and went to sit on the bleachers. There were a bunch of cross-country kids, though, who had taken this as a challenge and were running seemingly endless laps. Not quite popular kid figured that if he could keep up with those guys, he'd show that he deserved to be on the team. Lap after lap, he hung right at the back of their pack, never catching up but never falling completely away either. The large group of us who had already given up and were sitting on the bleachers saw this, and we all started rooting for this kid and watching closely. As the pack passed our bleachers on yet another lap, the kid following behind visibly messed in his pants. Stuff poured from the leg holes of his gym shorts and onto the pavement as we all watched in horror. And the kid, well, he just kept running. On the next lap, our gym teacher, who fancied himself a drill sergeant, flagged the kid down and made him clean up the mess as we all sat there wishing for an unexpected asteroid strike to put us out of our collective misery. His popularity never recovered. He never ran a single meter for our cross-country team either. Now, if anybody wants to make a Rudy-esque film out of this, hit me up and I'll fill in the blanks. Yikes, those type of quote-unquote adults should never be allowed in the school system. I mean, come on, these are kids, not soldiers. Story 2. He hurt the disabled kid, who was well loved by everyone and told dad jokes. The problem was that the kid got serious injuries and almost ended, so he went to prison. What did disabled kid do to deserve this? Allegedly, he told a somewhat flirty joke to the popular guy's sister, who was one grade below us. I think it was along the lines of, quote, if you were a dessert, you'd be a cutie pie kind of joke. His parents don't even visit him in prison. So the disability he has is cerebral palsy. Before the fight, he was just a really good guy to be around, really funny and kind to others. He had a Mitch Hedberg kind of funny where it's a bit dry but witty. He missed essentially a full year of school, and when he came back, he just wasn't the same. He was a wallflower. He rarely spoke to anyone anymore, not even his old friends. His cognitive function definitely declined noticeably. Perhaps it was the new wallflower personality, but he stopped engaging in class as much, and his handwriting entirely changed. It was really hard to see as he would have often listened to YouTube stuff about comedy, and when he came back, he would just sort of stare off sometimes. And sometimes some of my friends said his eyes would water. His entire world changed, and it was clear to some extent that he was scared to be back in school and terrified of running into the little sister and the majority of the girls in our school. She ended up changing schools after the incident happened. I think that being dumb teenagers, we all had a lot of displaced anger at the sister. Last I heard, his family actually moved out of our town and he has no social media, so I have no idea what's become of him. Story 3. I grew up in a small farm town in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't uncommon for my friends and I to spend 3 nights a week out in some farmer's field or on some forgotten gravel road drinking anything we could get our hands on. Of course, we all drove home after. When I think of the number of times that we did that, I marvel that all of us made it out of high school alive. I don't know what in the world any of us were thinking, and I'm thankful that through dumb luck, we never caused a tragedy like this. A few years after I got out of high school, a kid probably 6 years younger than me, whom I knew very well, borrowed a friend's truck to drive from a field party into town to get more drinks. He wrapped the truck around a tree. He was so unidentifiable that the cops called the parents of the kid who owned the truck to ID him. They thought it was their kid and went home to make funeral arrangements. A couple of hours later, their very hammered but very alive son walked in, having finally been driven home by somebody. It was messed up. The kid's girlfriend missed his funeral because she was giving birth to his child. Don't drink and drive, folks. Story 4. 2 groups of popular kids from my high school and a rival school ended up causing a tragedy that destroyed several lives. They had a bonfire party at a lake and tensions flared between the schools. At some point, someone pulled out a weapon which caused everyone to panic and rush to their vehicles. In the chaos, several people jumped into the back of a pickup truck. The driver, impaired and trying to escape, attempted to pass a car by veering into oncoming traffic. In a desperate maneuver to avoid a collision, the truck flipped. The accident was catastrophic. A friend who witnessed the crash described it as horrific and an overwhelming scene of chaos. The incident has become infamously known as the Name of the Lake tragedy on that road. So yeah, not just one popular kid, but basically all of them from two schools messed up each other's lives in one messed up night. Again, do not drink and drive. Story 5. Flashy, good-looking kid, John, who was honestly quite talented at Taekwondo, kept pushing and poking and pestering the quiet new kid who immigrated from Venezuela. After the immigrant kid, Andre, had enough and pushed back, John challenged him to a fight after school. The fight was over hilariously quickly. The Taekwondo dude tried a flashy kick you'd see in a Van Damme movie, and it looked good but missed. Andre just easily dodged it, threw a right hook and then a left roundhouse kick. John was out cold, standing up. Later, we found out that Andre's dad was a former military police officer in Venezuela and a kickboxer of some repute, so he had taught his kid from an early age how to protect himself. Anyways, this happened in March and we never saw John till graduation in the summer. He spent the rest of the school year being homeschooled. Ha! It's always funny when Taekwondo kids think they can fight. Story 6. Not my school, but someone I knew. My first career was in road construction. This was in South Texas, and the crews were made up by a majority of immigrants from Mexico. I had this one white dude on my crew, a truck driver, and he had a weird story. He was a high school quarterback, college recruit, committed to Baylor, popular, wealthy parents, the whole thing. Among other things, got hammered, wrapped his sports car around a tree, destroyed his leg to the extent that he had a permanent limp. Pain meds led to opiates and balanced those out with substances. Dude was a mess. He had some wild stories like essentially rustling his father's cattle to get money to buy substances. He ended up marrying a counselor from rehab. I tried to keep him out of trouble, and things I learned from him eventually led to cleaning house and firing entire crews off other jobs because the company had become a traveling crime wave moving from job site to job site. He came to me crying one day because they needed a truck driver on another site and I was told to send him. He knew he would relapse because the entire crew were all I didn't mention this was a family business and I was family. What a nightmare. I hope, Stevie, you're doing okay, wherever you are. So glad to be out of that. Family is just bad sometimes. Story 7. Small private college in Connecticut. This guy was a Pat Tillman lookalike before we knew Pat Tillman. Even as a freshman, he was like 6'2", looked 24 and muscled like a pro football player. Handsome and almost an action figure toy hero, square-jawed. Driving around campus and town with his Jeep Wrangler and chiseled abdominal muscles like something out of an Abercrombie and Fitch ad. He had gone to Cheshire Academy just a few miles away, and to be honest, he was generally a good guy. For reference, Cheshire Academy is like where the John C. Bigglesworth third types send their boys to get them on the path to success. He was the campus Chad decades before the meme, of course. There was a popular restaurant and bar a few miles down the street that was serving drinks to him and his buddies despite being under 21. They got in the Jeep after and drove past the campus on the twisty, windy back roads and lost control. He was gone and his passenger survived right at the end of our junior year. Bad decisions? Didn't deserve it, of course. Story 8. 3 guys broke into the auditorium in the last couple of months of senior year, connected one of their phones to a really expensive speaker and played some music. Because they didn't know how to properly use the equipment, they ended up damaging it somehow. All 3 got charged with vandalism for kicking the doors open and breaking the locks. The one that hooked his phone up was charged for property damage for the sound equipment, had to pay thousands to the guy that owned the equipment because it wasn't the school's, it was his stuff that he carted back and forth between 3 different schools for performances. All 3 kids got suspended and lost their scholarships. They were also not able to graduate IRRC, or at least if they did, they weren't allowed to participate at graduation. Story 9. Maurice Claret was an OSU football star who was drafted at the end of the 3rd round of the 2005 NFL Draft, indicating that the Denver Broncos saw some promise in him. However, the Broncos ultimately released him from his contract after a disappointing performance in preseason training with no other teams opting to sign him. Claret was observed making an illegal turn by a police car. The cop attempted to pull Claret over. Claret's reaction was to lead police on a high-speed chase that was eventually ended by a police spike strip. Attempts to subdue Claret failed because he donned Kevlar body armor before the chase began. He was eventually subdued. A search of his vehicle discovered an open bottle of drinks, 2 to 3 weapons, and a matched set of samurai swords. This arrest happened while Claret was free on bail from another unrelated armed robbery case. He was sentenced to 7.5 years and was released for good behavior after 3.5. He never played a game in the NFL. Story 10. Was speeding and ran a four-way stop sign. They bulged a little bit in the middle, so he went airborne. Car drifted in the wind off to the side of the road and dug into the ground. Pipes that were laid on the side of the road to replace water lines lined up perfectly with the front bumper and made the car and everything inside of it Swiss cheese. Couldn't have happened to a bigger schmuck and his two best giant schmucks friends. There were two groups of people in the high school, people who hated that we got dragged into rallies about how sad it was, and rallies about safe driving, and kids who honestly realized that we could actually pass away and it scared them so bad they couldn't stop crying anytime any of their names were brought up. Like, I remember thinking to myself, why is she crying? He made her life a living hell for all of middle school and tried to light her hair on fire at that party last year. Story 11. He got buzzed at a Halloween party and left his best friend, the driver, also buzzed in their 93 Mustang. This was in the early 2000s. Went off the highway into a ravine going probably way higher than the speed limit, hit a rock outcropping. The best friend wasn't wearing a seatbelt, but he was. The airbags didn't deploy. The part that messed him up? Wait, that wasn't it, you might ask? His best friend didn't pass away instantly. The force of the impact caused severe injuries. He remained conscious despite his injuries and witnessed his best friend's tragic end. He managed to get out of the car and seek help. A passerby stopped to assist and the police were called. He was wearing a realistic Halloween mask, which added to the confusion. Best friend passed away at some point along here. His funeral was a closed casket. Popular guy needed severe reconstructive surgery and spent the next 12 years in therapy. Didn't graduate high school, did some time with substances, went religious, went silent on social media. Ran into him during 2020. Of all the things, I recognized his eyes above his mask at a store. Really quiet, really anxious movements. We grabbed lunch a week later. Sober for 4 years, went extremely unreligious when his therapist started breaking through, and he'd been living with an in-law at his parents' house working a bad job. Went back and finished his high school diploma, then got his associates at a community college in business, started a web design, webmaster consulting business from home, got contracts courtesy of his dad's connections, bought a house, moved out, will not drive a vehicle, cannot ride front passenger in any vehicle, gets shaky just being in a vehicle, rides a bike as much as he can to where he needs to go, or his girlfriend drives while he's in the back seat. His voice, in a word, sounds haunted, like just talking to him you can tell that memory is burned into his brain and it's constantly there. The heartbreaking thing here is that unlike most popular guys, this one was popular because he was a really nice guy. Football captain that did drama and computers back when that branded you a nerd, so he was an advocate for the little person. His face now actually looks pretty good. It doesn't look like it was basically rebuilt, just a little off. But yeah, that guy's entire life trajectory just shattered that day. Story 12. She was arrested for vandalism our senior year. Nothing too major, but enough she was going to have to do some community service, maybe an overnight in county jail. She had a court date during spring break, which she asked the court to move so she could go to Cancun. The judge said not only no, but no, and if you don't appear, you'll forfeit your bond and will get a bench warrant, which will result in prison time for fleeing. And since her plan was to go to Cancun, that made her an international fugitive for a time, so the potential prison time was substantially longer. And she went to spring break in Cancun anyway. At the hearing, the judge asked her attorney where she was. He said he believed she went to Cancun against his and the court's instructions. A bench warrant was issued, and she was arrested when her plane back from Mexico landed. She spent the next 3 months in county jail with no bond, so she couldn't finish school and graduate, then was given another 1 year when she was sentenced for vandalism and fleeing. Last I heard, she never really ended up finishing high school and didn't go to college. Ended up married to a low-level dealer while she was still a teenager. For a while, I used to see her on friends' social media every now and then, but I haven't heard anything about her for probably the last 15 years. Story 13. Quote-unquote popular kid in the army. He was a really squared-away dude and honestly a cool guy. The guy straight up saved some lives and was going to get awarded for it. He would have gotten 100% P&T disability had he completed his contract. He was also pretty close to getting a good conduct medal as well. He didn't have a signal problem that anybody could see from the outside. Then he got hammered and drove home, sent his Tundra pickup 80 feet through the air at 110 miles per hour into a tree in the hills of Tennessee, crawled away and a highway trooper found him. He told the trooper his story and the trooper waited an hour to give him the breathalyzer, still blew way above the legal limit. Arrested on the spot, exiled from his unit, lost his wife and child, dishonorably discharged, and last I heard, he's logging in Canada somewhere. If you're out there and recognize the story, I hope you got your life turned around, brother. Story 14. I knew a guy who was a huge basketball star in a small high school. He was a truly nice kid that everybody liked. He had all kinds of scholarship offers from colleges. At the end of his senior year, he saw a beer delivery truck idling on Main Street and thought it would be a great idea to steal the truck. He drove the truck out into the country and hid it in some trees. He told all his buddies and they emptied the truck and had an epic party. Eventually, the authorities figured out who had taken the truck. Because he had no criminal record and was highly thought of, also his dad was connected in local government, he didn't do any real time, his dad paid for the drinks, etc. All the college offers dried up immediately and he ended up playing pickup ball and taking over his dad's farm. He was and is a friendly, easygoing guy, but you always wonder how far he could have gone on his talent if not for one really dumb mistake. Story 15. Senior year, conservative upper-middle-class town that leaned hard into hypocrisy. The town was smaller, but teenagers never really got in trouble. My girlfriend and I were caught 3 times over the course of a year by police, told to move on, private property, etc. But it never made it into the police blotter. One night at a party, she was feeling herself probably a little buzzed, and a group of 4 popular guys that she had kind of dated, also buzzed, convinced her to give them all one. She agreed on the condition they wouldn't tell anyone. She managed to take 3 of them out to a car and complete the deed, so naturally the one guy who didn't get one told everyone at the party about what she had done. When Monday rolled around by 11 a.m., the entire senior class and the teaching staff knew about her. She was distraught. People who she thought were her friends ridiculed and made fun of her. Even some of the nice, quiet girls made jokes about her in class. So, for the rest of the school year, she had become a social pariah. She was depressed and apparently was being shamed at home as well. Some teachers did stand up for her, some ignored the teasing. She was quiet the rest of the school year. I think it all broke her. She didn't end up going to college. She never married 30 years later, and she still lives at home. Story 16. I lived in a university dorm, and there were 2 guys that lived on the first floor who were absolutely inseparable. They had been the best of friends their entire lives and even looked like brothers. Everyone really liked them, and we all partied together in each other's rooms regularly. One night, the 2 guys left campus to go out and drink. Apparently, a lot of drinks were consumed that night. There was a horrific car accident, the driver walked away with small injuries, and the passenger passed away instantly. We were all shocked and deeply disturbed when we heard what happened. About a week after the accident, the driver of the car quietly walked into the dorm with his parents to collect his things from their shared room. You could see by the look on his face that he was a shell of his former self. Deeply ashamed and obviously hurting badly, he didn't even look up at those of us who had been chatting in the hallway when he walked in. No one said a word to him. I don't think any of us even knew what to say. I think about those guys now and then and wonder what happened to their families in the aftermath of such a tragedy. Story 17. I don't think he was a popular kid when we were in school, but he ended up with a lot of attention afterwards. He was a grade above me, but I had a physics class with him. A few years later, he was working as an electrician when he got shocked so badly he wound up in a coma. They weren't sure he had any chance of survival, but he did. They had a party to celebrate and the whole ordeal definitely made him popular. But wherever the party was, it wasn't at his place because he had to drive home from it. And he did so while hammered. That's right, he survived being zapped into a coma only to pass away driving home from the party celebrating his survival. Do not drink and drive. Story 18. Took pictures of himself getting one from the football coach's daughter and slipped a copy under the coach's office door as revenge for some slight against him. He was one of the top football players. He was dumb enough to think the coach's daughter wouldn't say who it was in the picture. Of course she told, and of course he knew, and of course he was kicked off the team. Few months of disciplinary actions after because he sort of spiraled and he was sent to one of those schools for people with difficulty functioning in normal schools. I don't know if it ruined his life, but it ruined his trajectory and he wound up dropping out of the local community college instead of going off to Florida State like he had planned. Yeah, someone who behaves like that was heading for a downward spiral no matter what, especially for just some slight. And if you're enjoying the video and maybe being affected by 1 or 2 of these, it's alright, just don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 19. He was accused of harming multiple girls in high school. Nobody believed it because he was such a nice guy. He was friends with everyone and every girl wanted to date him. A few years later, he got arrested for hurting a girl at a club or something like that. I don't know, I never really liked him. He had the smell of a con artist salesman, and to me it seemed like he faked his emotions and tailored them to the situation to appear more likable. Another kid, my cousin's friend, was a genius, like literally a genius, and he got a full ride at Yale when he was still young. He built a working drone 20 years before those were even a thing. Anyways, he ended up rejecting the offer and moved to Oregon with a few friends. My cousin went to visit him, and he lived in a one-bedroom apartment with 3 friends. They all worked at McDonald's, and the only thing they did was smoke grass and play video games all day outside of work. Lastly, this girl had a massive glow-up. She went from being that weird, smelly, socially awkward girl to being absolutely gorgeous with the most enchanting charisma I've ever seen, and she became massively popular. Anyways, turns out she's not such a nice person because she started a love triangle. Well, not really a triangle, but like a triangular prism, because she was dating 6 of the hottest popular guys at once, and she made them compete for her love until one day she got pregnant by a guy that wasn't even part of their prism. And that's the fastest I've ever seen 6 guys lose interest in a girl all at once. In college, she ended up getting pregnant again and dropping out. Me and a friend saw her working at Denny's as a waitress a few years back. She was like 25, 26, but she looked like she was 40. Moral of the story, just because someone is liked by a lot of people doesn't mean they're a good person. Now, I have a question for you guys. Does power corrupt people, or is it corrupt people that go into positions of power? Were their downfalls inevitable, or did they naturally have a bad nature about them, which allowed them to get into those positions? Story 20. A girl I had known since grade school as among the popular girls when we started high school. Following the first homecoming dance, there was a party and drinking and the things you'd expect during a high school party. At some point, she went to use the bathroom, proceeded to plug the toilet, and eventually made the decision to manually remove it from the toilet. She didn't make much effort to dispose of the evidence and may have told someone what happened. Following that eventful weekend, she became known as Mess Claw and quickly fell out of favor with the popular kids. She was always a bit of a bully, so I didn't feel bad for her when I heard about what happened. The name stuck with her even after getting a new start in a different state for college because someone at that party ended up at the same school as her. I'd feel bad about the incessant pestering if she wasn't such a mean person. Felt like one of the rare instances karma got the right person. Story 21. Super popular kid in my grade wrecked 2 cars driving hammered. Nothing came of it. Very handsome, insane jawline, basically a jacked male model at an early age. Could bench 3 plates at the time. Had everything any stereotypical Disney high school movie cool kid could imagine. He eventually became a cop. His dad was like the head school cop for our district or something else high up, which is why he didn't end up in jail after the multiple driving accidents. At a nightclub one time, he got caught doing substances in the bathroom and got booked. Imagine how obvious it had to be for the cops to get called for personal use in a nightclub. He tried to sue the police department claiming he didn't consent to random tests. I think he either burned all his bridges or decided to move on, or daddy couldn't vouch for him anymore. We should have known he was a slow learner when he came back from a local private school to our public school. It's basically impossible to get kicked out of private school here. Anyway, he, last I heard, runs a CrossFit-style gym. I'm speculating, but probably funded by daddy. Good for him. He was never a malicious person, just really, really, really dumb. Yes, it made the news locally and nationally. Hope you're doing well, Adrian. Story 22. Was our class clown extremely popular? After high school, he was an average student. I think without the audience of classmates, he was rather aimless in what to do with his life. He joined the military and went to Iraq for 2 tours working as part of an explosive ordnance disposal team like in the film The Hurt Locker. He came back with severe PTSD, chronic pain, and significant hearing loss, which spiraled into an misuse. He got into a toxic relationship with a girl who also had a substance misuse, and she got pregnant by another man, which he only found out about when the baby was a few months old. He had thought the baby was his. He's now in jail for 50 years in what the medical examiner called the worst case I've seen in my entire career. When I saw the perp walk on the news and pictures in the paper, he was an absolute shell of what he had been as a teenager. We were in our 20s and he looked like he was 70. It's complicated because I 100% believe he deserves to be in jail for the crime, but I also believe going to Iraq with his personality and doing that type of job was always going to destroy him in one way or another. Story 23. He messed up his career path. He had the looks, the charm, and the natural athletic ability that made him a star on the court. His grades were impeccable and he had a full scholarship. Life was good and this popular kid was on track for a bright future. But then he decided to let it all go to his head. He started slacking off, skipping practices, and spending more time partying than perfecting his game. He thought he was untouchable and that his talent would carry him to the NBA drafts. The scouts noticed his decline, and soon his name was nowhere near the NBA draft picks. His once promising career was doomed, and he ended up settling for a job at a Fortune 500 company. He still lives a life of luxury with his perfect family, taking their 2-month-long vacations and rubbing their wealthy lifestyle in everyone's faces. But he could have been so much more. If he had put in the effort, he could have been dunking on the courts, making millions, and living the dream. Instead, he's just another corporate kisser, probably regretting memories of his wasted potential. Story 24. Freshman year, I had a role model senior power couple. The kind who both had full scholarship with a secure job after graduation, led the student council, 4.0 CGPA, uni representative national and international level, public speaker, active in their religious group in and around their congregation. You get the drift. One fully sponsored overseas study trip in their final year. They made their own home video and pics and saved it in their laptop. It was when phones had no external SD card slots, etc. During the trip back, the laptop got busted. It was a virus, and our IT lecturer offered to help them fix it. The only issue was the recovery was done with a uni-owned laptop, and the malware kind of got all their documents sent to the entire faculty's database and server, and some dude got a hold of it and reported it. It was widely viewed before the dean put a stop to it, and they were expelled with all their scholarships redacted, and they never graduated. They might have transferred credit to another uni, but it was the last I heard of them. Story 25. A few work friends of mine went to his school when it happened, but he was a football player at a rival school and was slightly mad that our school kept defeating his school's team rather consistently for 20 years. So he decided to call in a threat to my school, and the next night called in another threat. Well, the feds got involved and he lost his scholarship, and since he was a minor, everything got sealed. And most of the news sites have expunged everything about it. However, it wasn't why it got onto the news. The principal at the time horrifically mishandled it. For the threat, only 25% of the parents were even called about it. The rest had to find out from other parents or the news or the kids. From 9 a.m. to like 5:30 p.m., we were on the football field and not allowed to leave long after the building was cleared. Several kids went to the hospital from the heat. Then that night, the other threat got called in, and despite parents signing up for the automated call list, only 10% of the families were even called. And since everyone had really bad sunburns, they gave the next day an excused absence. Because of the horrific mishandling, the principal that had been at the school since its opening in the 1990s has to take an early retirement. Story 26. He was an amazing football player, built as a prototypical OL body type in high school that would benefit from bulking in college. He was scouted by many major schools in the Big 12, SEC, and ACC. 6'4" and 265 pounds his senior year in high school, but ran like a gazelle. His senior year at college, he and a buddy from the football team got the bright idea to rob someone they were planning on buying substances from. Went to his house, brandished a weapon, stole the substance and his money, and left. The perfect crime until this dealer called the police to out himself so that he could get the guys that stole from him. Did a little under 5 years in prison, married his girlfriend there too. This guy's family are super nice immigrants, and his dad is a pastor, or was anyway. Super out of character, and he's actually seemed to turn things around for the better after prison. He was a good friend growing up that I just grew distant from, but I remember just being so mad that he threw away what could have been a surefire NFL career for something so dumb. Story 27. He was a star basketball and football player, big city kid that moved to the country. We were friends until he spent the night at my house. I had food poisoning and he stole all my DVDs and PS2 games, got picked up and went home. No one ever saw that side of him, and everyone else adored him, brought us to state every year, made our small school worth talking about, etc., etc. Fast forward a few years, I see him at a casino. We are civil to each other. 2 weeks later, he's in the local paper for stealing from his friends during a raid. He ran from the cops and stole his friend's truck, got in a high-speed chase with his friend's truck, going in the opposite lane down the interstate in the middle of the night. Cops pulled him over when he ran out of gas, found substances and stolen weapons in the car. He's sitting in prison for all of the above. Never pulled the "I told you so" to the people I keep in contact with, and kind of feel bad for him. Story 28. A kid I went to school with partied a lot with his friends. One night they were out partying and he drank and drove. He got into a car accident and all 3 of his passengers, who were his closest friends, passed away. He was allowed to graduate high school, but after walking off from getting his diploma, he walked directly into handcuffs. Fast forward a handful of years and I'm working for a community alternative court. Basically, it's people who get into low-key offenses who we think are possibly rehabilitable and not a real harm to the community. Normally, we give them alternative sentencing, but they have to appeal to essentially a board of judges. Now, this same guy comes in and is asking for forgiveness for his trespassing. He was trespassed because he got hammered and did a bunch of stupid stuff at some property. When I had seen he was on my docket, I had looked him up, and after he got out of jail, he got into trouble for a physical altercation having to do with drinks and a different incident than the one he was visiting us that day to deal with. He didn't seem to recall me, even though we went to school together. I asked him what had caused his issues, and the disturbance was his trespassing, and he let me know that it had to do with drinks. I asked him if he had any other issues with drinks prior to that. He tried to downplay that he had gotten into an argument having to do with drinks previously. I further pressed him and asked if he had issues before that as well. It took a lot of pressing, asking about other drinking-related issues, suggesting maybe he's even had issues with drinking and driving, to get him to finally confess they had ended his best friends because he was drinking and driving. Story 29. This was in Sweden, just for context. Guy in my high school used to be one of my good friends when we were starting high school. Then he became the biggest schmuck of all after he started getting good grades and got on a swim team. He was better than everybody, changed his friend group, and now I was certainly not good enough anymore. Started dressing as if he was some kind of big shot. After high school, his parents paid for an apartment in a different city so he could go to a prestigious mathematics-focused university. He excelled there too, and at that point, he wouldn't even see me when we ran into each other back in our hometown. At that time, I was working instead of studying, which I guess was completely beneath his social status. After he finished uni with high grades, etc., he started working at a fancy bank. Super obnoxious and bigger than everyone by then. He lasted about 2 months. Turns out he's book smart but completely useless in actual employment in those subjects. So he's now single, moved back in with his parents, and working part-time as a packing assistant at his mother's apothecary. Bet they're loving it. He does say hi now when we meet. I guess reality checked him. Story 30. Not the most popular guy, but popular enough. We were buddies, but I don't know what his home life was like that led to it, but here it is. So we were the equivalent of like co-worker friends, cool and friends with each other, really funny and outgoing guy in middle school and high school when I knew him. He was bad at English, I was bad at math. We became friends because we had all the same classes. He'd do my math work and let me cheat off of him, partner up with me on projects and do all the work in math, and I'd do the same. Anyways, he was a starting player in middle school for a football team, then in high school he's in varsity football as well as track and field. One day I woke up to a text from my mom with an article and it said, "Hey, do you know this guy?" And sure enough, I did. Turned full-on criminal for the Crips IIRC. Nobody was harmed, but he's serving time and still inside. The other one happened to a pretty popular guy in my school who was ended by a rival member of a group. Guy was ended in his sleep through his bedroom window. And the kicker, the one who did it? Guy was my best friend in elementary school. It was cold for a couple of days, but he turned himself in and is facing life without parole. Story 31. I don't know how badly or even if this messed up his life, but there was a guy I went to school with, reasonably popular. I worked at the coffee stand in the local hospital of my hometown. Watched that dude come in at least 3 separate times for a paternity test. 3 different young moms, newborn babies, he's there in tow at the lab. Maybe none of them are his, but it's also possible all 3 were. And that's a good way to mess up your life at an early age. This alone is why I do not understand parents that don't want girls because, quote, they might get pregnant in high school. Yeah, that wouldn't be ideal, but in the land of bad scenarios, and even as a parent myself, I'll take, "Mom, I'm pregnant," over, "Mom, I may have knocked up 3 different girls any day, any time," if I have to choose one of the shitty scenarios. I don't know the outcome, whether they were all his or not. I wasn't close enough to him to inquire, and even though I'm the nosiest man in the west of the Prime Meridian, I knew not to hit him up in some way with a, "OMG, did you forget no glove, no love?" It's known in that small town this happened, but if anyone knows the whole story or the outcome, no one was talking. And it was so long ago that even if I ran into him, I wouldn't bring it up. Story 32. Accused a beloved teacher. This isn't a case of not believing a victim, but rather she flat out lied. Any quote-unquote proof she said she had either wasn't actually any proof, or she couldn't find it when asked. Dates she gave off when they were supposedly together were proven false, as he was either with other teachers, other students, or even in a completely different location at the time. Unfortunately, not only was it a female student accusing a male teacher in recent years, so taken much more seriously than male student and female teacher, or had this been many, many years ago, But also that same year, 3 other teachers at other schools were also accused by their students. So it was an extra sensitive issue as that general topic was all over the news and such. He was also supposedly a very attractive teacher that many students had crushes on. So when this came out, the school freaked out. Also, he was married with kids, so this could also have affected that as well. And because of the other teachers who were caught, the school was on the defensive instantly and put him on leave the second the student went to them and dragged their feet with any actual investigation. We all truly believed that the school was just trying to get him to quit so he had a chance to save face. But after many students vocally backed him up and pushed for them to actually look into it, they found out the student lied and the school told him he could go back the next school year. He was put on leave in October-ish, November-ish, and found innocent around April and May. The second they cleared his name, he thanked them, then gave them notice that he had actually applied to another school and was already accepted, but was just waiting until his name was officially cleared out before leaving as he didn't want this to follow him. The school freaked and tried to do everything to keep him because a lot of students who were taking his class dropped and no one wanted to sign up for it the next year, so they heard he was back. It wasn't a necessary class, it was only one of those level optional AP classes that counted for college credit. He was a great teacher and could teach to just about anyone, so no one wanted to take an extremely hard class with a teacher they didn't know. I think the class was virtually empty for 3 to 4 years, so all of us who were there the year he was accused graduated out. Story 33. One of the most popular kids at my school got into selling substances the last couple of years of high school. It obviously backfired and they got into it. He and his best friend, who came from a troubled family unlike himself, had to go to rehab, which only worked on him. There's a difference between taking substances and recreationally on occasion and making it a lifestyle. Nobody in the world benefits from making it a lifestyle. The last time I saw the one who couldn't get over substances was at an NA meeting. He looked 10 years older than me and sadder than I had ever seen him. And I'd known him since 2nd grade. It broke my heart. Not only that, but the other kid, the one that was more popular and got them both into substances, completed rehab fine, and his dad bought him a spa and a salon to run. This other kid who was still into substances had no one to return to as his family was not a safe place for him. But the rich kid's family caught him off after rehab. It's such a sad situation where you can see how coming from a wealthy family versus not having a family at all can really make or break resiliency. Story 34. Bitterness. At middle school, we had a pro cricketer come to teach our class. This kid bowled out twice back to back. He was an athletic freak. I remember by then sports reps were fighting over his sporting pathways. Everyone wanted him in their age grade sides from rugby, soccer, to cricket. Talent scouts from some major teams were floating around and everyone knew he had a life of pro athletics ahead of him. Then his dad, who he idolized, cheated on his mom. I've never seen someone just fall apart like that before. He quit playing sports and started gaming, became a recluse and gained a lot of weight quickly. Then his sister tried to end herself and he literally vanished during our final year, allegedly to be homeschooled. I tracked him down 5 years later and took him out for a meal. Gone was the athletic boy, and instead was a broken, angry man who spent 15 minutes ranting about how one of our teachers hadn't given him the right grade. I mean, I failed that class and it's never bothered me. I've tried to get in contact a few times since. Got a message back once, a few years later, then radio silence. Heartbreaking stuff. I believe he could have played at the highest level, but foreseeing his world collapse after the divorce. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you'd love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.